Wow, that was interesting. These are going to be fun doing these moving forward. I forgot what it was like sitting here talking to myself in the fucking gym with Owen hiding behind a SoundCloud. You know. How would you do back-to-back meets? So that's, keep my paperwork organized here. How would you do back-to-back meets? The first question with that would be obviously who, who and what, why, and why, right? That would be the first question, is why. But it's, I don't know what the context here, because sometimes with high school federations, sometimes they'll have, a meet every month for 3 or 4 months. So to me, that's kind of back-to-back meets. So there is a reason for that. Other times there may be a situation to where, a lifter needs to qualify for a meet and they don't want to use, an off season to be able to do that. They just want to hit that qualifying meet on the way to when that main meet's going to be able to be, that qualifying total. That's a little bit different scenario, because that qualifying meet is just going to be for the qualifying lifts. That's not going to be able to push it real hard. The back-to-back meets with the high school athlete can be organized, a little bit differently as well. Some of them can be, periodized up to whatever the state's going to meet's going to be. So they're not maxing out all the time. There's other cases where somebody could, have a meet that they kill it at, so they go in there and they kill it and they leave 50 pounds on the platform or whatever it's going to be. And it frustrates the shit out of them. So they want to jump in another meet 2 weeks later to be able to hit that number. Or that's the scenario, which is my first response would be no, save it for the next meet. Typically that's my response for all of them, except for the high school meet type of thing and the qualifying meet type thing. All the other ones are I guess there's another scenario. So there's another scenario to where you train for and you peak for a meet and you go to the meet and the meet is just a fucking disaster. So the equipment's not safe. The warm-up room's just fucking trash. And it's, you make a decision like, fuck it, I am not lifting there. It's rare, but I've seen that happen before. That's a different scenario. That's a different scenario as well, because also that body was not taxed, on that day. So that brings up a different answer to what it would be. And I could see why that person would want to extend the training cycle to be able to display the strength that they have. So I see how that would kind of play into it. In that case, I would find a meet as close as possible, like the next week, and really not even change anything, just float right into the meet and do that. All the other scenarios, normally I have a hard time wrapping my head around why and what the positive yield would be out of it. So I guess my first answer to that would be to not do it, and then to have a conversation more involving what the longer term objective is, which is one of the questions that I have down here a little bit later, is if that longer term objective is in play and you're on that path of doing that, how does that fit into that? And normally it won't, which means that person's not really committed to the longer term objective, and they're making an emotional decision instead of a sport competitive athlete decision, which becomes a different conversation there as well. So as you see, I'm kind of trying to dodge the answer, but if this is to be the case and the back's against the wall and there's no other option, which I highly fucking doubt to be true, how I would look at that and how I've looked at that with myself in the past and even other people is some things to keep in mind is based upon how you train, so I'm making a lot of assumptions here, that if you peaked for the meet, and let's say the meet didn't go well, that's another example. Meet doesn't go well, so you're pissed off. You're like, fuck it, I want to be able to get be able to get the total that I want in the first place, which, by the way, almost every single time never happens. So it's very fucking rare that it can happen. But if it's the case, and that's what the objective in the goal is for that, the way that you can increase the probability that it could happen is to understand that you've been through a peaking process, which means that you've already reduced volume in your training to a degree. So while you're in competitive shape, to be able to lift 9 lifts in one day, you're not in as good of shape to be able to recover from the training because of how the lead up to the meet went. So the last deadlift may have been, 14 days out. The last squat may have been 10. The last bench may have been 7. I'm just throwing shit out there. Either way, typically the last 2 weeks, sometimes the last 3 weeks, are more in a reduced volume state with maybe some higher intensity lifts that are put in there to be able to peak for the meet. And then the meet is a higher intensity day, the max attempts that are done on that day. So your body's been in one way deconditioned from a recovery standpoint. This is a lot of the reasons why recovering from a meet takes longer than if it was not a meet. So your GPP, or whatever you want to call it, work capacity, is compromised. That's why people have different phases of training after a meet. So it's compromised. So you have to understand that is true. And actually, it's somewhat compromised. That recovery work capacity ability is somewhat compromised before that meet day even happens. After that meet day, it's compromised a little bit more. So now, whenever that next meet's going to be, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, wherever, if it's going to be 8 to 12 weeks, and then that's a different story. Then there's time to back off, and there's more than enough time to be able to train. But usually when you say back to back, I'm thinking that it's inside that window that would be most productive. So when it's inside that window, that's to be most productive. I would understand that the work capacity, GPP, however you want to call it, is compromised. So that week right after the meet, you would slowly need to bring in things to bring up that work capacity and GPP, even if it's, adding more steps per day, if it's light cardiovascular work, not extreme work, but enough to start to bring the work capacity up of the cardiovascular system in that week, because you're not going to train heavy that week, obviously, because you have to systemically let the body fucking come back to, let's say, neutral, if you can even get back to neutral in that time period. So you want that week to be able to slowly bring that back up again based upon how you feel. So you're going to be sore. You're going to be beat up for the meet. So you want to treat the first few days as just trying to work the soreness out. It can be machine work. It can be cable work, just shit like that. Usually by about midweek, then I would start putting in barbell squats, barbell benches, and barbell deadlifts, potentially on that Wednesday or that Thursday with light weight. We're talking warm-up type of weight. If I'm going to throw a percentage out there, 30% type weight, just greasing the groove type of stuff. Sets of 5, multiple sets of 3 to 5, just to get the technical feeling back, where you don't want to break yourself down more because you've already been broken down to a very high degree. What you want it to do is to start to build it back up without losing technical efficiency. So the longer you stay away from the technical aspect of a lift, the harder it's going to be able to bring that back up again. So through that first week, then maybe another day in that first week, kind of like that. So the weights are very low. The whole goal of that first short microcycle, whatever you want to call it, week, is to recover from the fucking meet the best that you possibly can. Keep technical capacity or efficiency, keep technical efficiency, and increase work capacity. Now, remember, it doesn't take a lot to increase your work capacity from where it was. You haven't done shit, from that standpoint for a month, so it does not take a lot to be able to bring that up. By doing too much, you're going to put yourself in even more compromised state. Once you get to that next week, then you need to look back and see how many weeks out is the meet, and then what is your typical number of weeks to peak, or in other words, how long do you need from your last heavy lift to be able to recover and to display that strength in a meet. So if it's 14 days, it's different for each lift, it's different for each person. So a lot of that plays into that. So you need to plan out when that last heavy lift is going to be and drop those wherever that day is. Now, where do you figure? So from there, you have a number of training sessions for each lift based upon the frequency that you were using before to be able to work back what those percentages should be to lead up to whatever that percent is. What should that percent be based on? I would go off of 90% of what you did in the meet, not 90% of what you thought you could have done in the meet, 90% of what you actually fucking did. So that becomes your 100% marker if you're taking percents off of that. So if you're going to train at 70%, 75%, 80%, that's based on whatever 90% of that lift was. So to be clear, let's say this lift that you hit in the meet was 300. So the opener was 300, you went to 350 and you fucking missed it on depth or whatever. Then you went to 350 again and then missed it on depth. That 300 is what we're looking at, not the 350. And then we're taking 90% of that 300, which would be 280. So that would be the projected max for this bonus meet that you shouldn't be doing in the first place, but for the bonus meet that you're going to be able to train for. And then that percentage, as you move into that, the 80%, 85%, 87%, or whatever the fuck it's going to be, it's based off that reduced perceived max for that meet. And then I would predominantly stay based upon, in most of these cases, you're looking at not very long time frames. I would stay with singles throughout this time. Now, it may be more. It may be like 3 to 5 singles that are going to be on each one of the competitive lift days. And with those 3 to 5 singles, because I hate repeating the same weight, that drives me fucking crazy, I would progressively increase the weight. So if it's going to be 80%, well, probably a little higher than that. So let's say if it's going to be 85%, and that's going to be one of the training days, that would be the last triple. Down from there might be, 83%, 80%, 78%, 75%, and that would compromise the 5 triples or the 5 fives kind of going into that. And then, deload as you would normally deload, and then go into the meet, pretty much with the same execution plan that you had for the very first one. And your probability to have a better day will be higher, much higher than if you try to base this on the lifts that you thought you could do, or even the lifts that you were using to train for that first meet. That reduction in intensity or percentage, in my opinion, has to be part of this, because your body is fucking not 100% going into it. So to think that it is fucking stupid, for one thing. It's gonna dig your dick into the dirt for another thing. It's gonna make it really fucking hard to display the strength that you even could display at, originally, from that standpoint. So you're almost treating this as if you've ever been part of a training plan, training to peak for something, and then you overreached, right? And by overreach, you overtraining, whatever it is, you start missing fucking reps. And you're far enough out. You're 7-8 weeks out from a meet. You get to that point and you start overreaching. You can't fucking push through that. You can push more drugs. You can try to do all this other shit that you want. Very rarely are you going to be able to pull your dick out of that fucking hole. You're just not going to be able to do it from that sense. The way that you have to do it is kind of how I just described here. You have to back down a little bit. You have to reassess what the actual base training percentage is, because you're not where you think you are. You're under that. Now, the potential benefit of this is the positive difference between your TM or your training max and your competitive max on that second meet or that back end meet, or if you overreach for the actual meet you're going to, it's way higher than what you may normally see. Where let's say you do normally have a 10% variance between your training max and your competitive max, which is high for most. You may get a 15% variance, because we've dialed back what the intensity is to be able to calculate what the workload is leading into that meet. And to dial back on that a little bit more with that work capacity, after a couple of weeks of bringing that general work capacity back up, you can probably begin to slide that back out again. As far as accessories, I would keep in one main accessory for sure, and I would play that by how you feel. You got to really play this a lot by how you feel, and not be emotional, but be objective. Which this is why I'm going to again say don't do this, because the decision was already fucking made emotionally. So if the only way forward to be able to push through what this training block would be an extremely high level of objectivity, and the decision wasn't originally made in emotion, the odds of that happening are going to be very fucking low. But to answer the question, that's how I would kind of walk through it. That's how I've presented to other people. And I can say that, a couple that have followed it have done really well. I can also say that the majority of the people that I've presented it to don't fucking follow it. They just go back and say, nope, this is what I'm doing. And they act like they can just repeat the last block before their last meet and have different success. Like how's that fucking even possible? But that's how they act. And that's how that kind of plays out from there. So, wow, that was interesting. These are going to be fun doing these moving forward. I forgot what it was like sitting here talking to myself in the fucking gym with Owen hiding behind a sound cloud, a sound blanket. All right, so training. The Table Talk crew is extra edition episodes that go out once a month. The content of those episodes are AMA related, question related, that come from the Table Talk Discord group, which is also part of being in the crew. When you're in the crew, there's dozens of ebooks that are in there. There's every seminar that we've ever done is put on there. There's courses that are put on there. There's series that have put on there. The original YouTube channel that we had for many years, before we migrated to the newer one, all that old content is on there. There's discussion groups for just general training, fitness, life, nutrition, basically everything that you can think of is on. So just go look at what that is, or better than that, just go to the description, click on join the crew. That helps directly support the podcast, which is how we're able to keep this thing rolling.